Okay, so welcome guys. Welcome to the session. I'm not quite sure if any of these 12 new members have joined today, but that's how much I checked the logs and we have from new folks from the last meetup. So many thanks for joining. And yeah, please feel reach out via the meetup preferable, but also LinkedIn. You can find us very, very easily there. So why the systems at play? Why do we care? Well, pretty much the community was born out of two main inspirations. The first one was in response to the current dominant reduction in its way of thinking and acting in the world. In other words, people try always to go down into, break something into pieces and then address each piece. Well, that doesn't solve usually the problem. And the second thing is the difficulty of understanding the deep and vast space of systems thinking and practical ways of applying it. If you are new to systems thinking, you may be like, in front of a big forest and like, where do I start kind of thing. So because of this, we created the community, and pretty much it's now a passion and aspiration to learn together more effective ways of being, thinking, and acting with the awareness of systems in our personal life, the way we organize work, and our community as well. So a few things we've already done in the past 7 months. The community has grown for over 160 systems thinkers. We've designed, facilitated an ST workshop and Lean Agile System Thinking conference. We organize international ST practitioners to present at our meetup, and also delivered 3 courses. Save the date, July 19th, we are planning another one, creating conditions for change, and we'll be posting it on the board of the meetup. So stay tuned for that one. Now, about our tonight's speaker, Bryan Hopkins has worked in learning and development fields since the late 1970s, first as a teacher and then in consultancy roles with private sector international government organizations. So since 2000, he has primarily been with United Nations Agency in humanitarian and developmental projects, and worked for 3 years helping to establish UNHCR's Global Learning and Development Center in Budapest. He has master's degrees in development studies from Imperial College and in systems thinking from Open University. And he's currently writing his 4th book for Routledge, provisionally entitled Learning Strategies for Sustainable Organizations, which will be published next year. So before Bryan begins, a couple of things. The presentation is being recorded. Please stay on mute during the presentation, so click the mute button now. If you go, and most importantly, there will be Q&A sessions, and during the presentation, if you think of a question, just type it in the chat box. So we will address as many questions as possible, but remaining questions will be answered most likely by email. We'll see if there are any remaining. But before we begin, any questions, guys? Anything else you would want to know? If not, Bryan, all yours.
Right.
Feel free to share your
hello
screen.
to you all. Most of you, good evening in Australia, but I know we've got at least one other person here in the UK. I'm calling from Sheffield. It's a lovely sunny day here, which is a bit of a change. It's nice to have a bit of sunshine to brighten the spirits. Yeah, Mihail's already introduced who I am, so I won't sort of go on about that again. Just a bit about systems thinking. I first came across systems thinking in about 1990, when I signed up for a course on management with the Open University here in the UK. And as part of the course, I attended a summer school where we were introduced to soft systems methodology. And I found it very interesting. I couldn't quite see how it fitted in with the work I did at the time, but I kind of plugged away at it. And sort of, over the last 30 years, I've kind of slowly worked out how to integrate it into the work I do as a learning and development consultant. And then in 2011, I signed up and took the OU's Master's MSc Systems Thinking in Practice course, where my understanding of systems thinking deepened. And I met Pauline Roberts, who I think is already presented to you there. So I know Pauline very well. And we kind of often chat about systems-y things. Anyway, so a while ago, I decided to spend some time doing some serious research into how my field of learning and development could contribute to the sustainability debate. I've been doing various projects with UN agencies on climate change, and all of my projects in the humanitarian and development field have got a kind of a sustainability component to them. So I was interested in sustainability. I thought, well, systems thinking is a kind of an important part of thinking about sustainability. When I was looking at the guidance for practitioners, for HRD people, learning design people on how to develop learning strategies for sustainability, there seemed to be very little around. So I thought, well, this might be sort of an opportunity for me to do something. So this is the book, Learning Strategies for Sustainable Organizations, hopefully published next year by Routledge. Yeah, just need to finish writing it now. So, okay, so what are we going to do today? What I'll do is I'll talk about the subject probably for about 25-30 minutes, and then we should have plenty of time for questions. First, I'll look at what sustainability may be, some ideas about it. It's kind of a difficult subject to discuss. I'll try to outline some of the key issues within that. Then they'll move on to what that means about developing learning strategies to support sustainability in organizations. And then I'll finish off by looking at how systems thinking tools, in particular the viable system model and critical systems heuristics, can help in developing relevant learning strategies. Okay, so first of all, what is sustainability? Okay, well, the first difficulty we come across is that sustainability is what academics call a contested concept. Which means that while everybody agrees on the name, they don't agree on what it actually means. So much of the literature about sustainability goes back to a definition developed in 1987 by a United Nations project, often referred to as the Bruntman Commission, that said that sustainable development is that which meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. Which is a very kind of open, very vague definition, and its very vagueness is why it's a very popular one, because it provides a good starting point for people to get into their own particular things. Over the years, there's come to be a sort of understanding that there are three, what I call dimensions to sustainability. There's the environmental, the social, and the economic. They're related to each other in a very complex way, so that they're constantly interacting with each other, which is a kind of problem that we as systems thinkers sort of readily understand. There are very many different ways of representing this. They're often called the three pillars of sustainability, but that's not a metaphor that I particularly like. My favorite metaphor is the idea of a three-strand helix, such as I've shown here. And I like that because it shows how the situation kind of, the three of them kind of evolve over time, and they're constantly interacting, and, that creates its own particular set of complexity issues. So let's first think about environmental sustainability. So of the three, it's the one which is probably the best understood. If you talk to people and just say sustainability, they think about the environment. And we're all becoming familiar with the problems that environmental sustainability is creating. So, in Australia, you've had recent problems with climate change, drought, wildfires, a plague of mice, which is apparently, all part of that. And even here in the UK, we've had extended dry periods, which have caused problems. So near where I live, we've had wildfires up on the moors behind where I live. So simply in April, we had very little rain. In May, we had more rain than has ever been recorded in May. So, you know, the climate is really becoming very extreme. Now, environmental sustainability is a wider subject than climate change, and perhaps the idea which best captures what it means is the idea of the 9 planetary boundaries, which was an influential paper put together by some scientists back in 2009, I think. And they identified 9 limits that we need to respect, which is ozone depletion, atmospheric aerosol loading, ocean acidification, phosphorus and nitrogen flows, freshwater use, land usage, biosphere integrity, and climate change. And they've indicated on this diagram, which is a very kind of commonly seen diagram, that there's 3 of those which we've already exceeded, and a number of them which we're getting to the limits of, and some which they don't really know. They're not quite sure how to measure them, and they're not even sure sort of, you know, the degree to which that may be a problem. So that's environmental sustainability. Social sustainability is probably less well understood. And what it means, there's a big argument about it in the academic world. However, you know, there does seem to be some agreement that it revolves around issues such as respecting human rights, ensuring that basic needs are met, working to ensure social cohesion and social equity. The difficulty with social sustainability is that those are highly political subjects, and people from different ends of the political spectrum will have very different, you know, sort of ideas about you know, what those mean and how important they are, and so what attention should be attached to them. For organizations, it presents particular issues because there are both kind of external issues about social sustainability and internal issues. So external social sustainability issues are about making sure that what you do as an organization has a sustainable impact, results in sustainability for the communities in which you operate. Okay, so it's a kind of a philanthropic perspective to it. But then there's also this internal social sustainability aspect, which is about making sure that how you as an organization operate respects those 4 issues. So making sure that you have good employment conditions, for example, making sure that you don't discriminate in any way. And that's kind of really quite a tricky one for many organizations. It means you actually have to walk the talk of sustainability. You have to be seen to be doing what you may be, you know, sort of demonstrating externally through your corporate social responsibility. The third one is economic sustainability. Personally, I've got a problem with the idea of economic sustainability. While environmental sustainability means maintaining the environment, social sustainability means maintaining society. I really have to question whether we want to maintain the economy as it is. You know, from my perspective, you know, the capitalist system we've lived in for the last centuries has, since the 1950s, played a very large part in creating the sustainability crisis that we are currently experiencing. So we see that in, you know, climate change, global pandemics, the COVID situation that we're still grappling with, mass migration, the loss of biodiversity, and so on. So how I illustrating the idea of economic sustainability is a graph here, which comes from a series known as the Great Acceleration. If you type Great Acceleration into Google, you'll come across a whole set of graphs which show much the same thing, which is that after 1950, the amount of stuff going on has increased dramatically. So here I've got primary energy use, and you see that there's a real sort of uptick. 1950, it's kind of, there's a steady increase before, but then after that, it kind of just shoots up. Sometimes people talk about hockey stick, okay, idea. And, you know, you can draw graphs like this for carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, for the amount of international travel that there is, population growth, the use of water, fertilizer consumption, so on and so on. And the issue, you know, for me, as far as economic sustainability is concerned, is that we're constantly told that we need economic growth. But how can economies continue to grow? You know, we live on a finite planet, spaceship Earth. You know, we have finite resources here. We can harvest energy from the sun through solar technology, but the materials we need in order to develop and utilize solar technology are finite. And so, you know, there are kind of some major issues to be faced in economic sustainability. I'm not going to go on any further. I could sort of talk, you know, sort of for quite a bit longer about the issue of economic sustainability. So, okay, so we have these 3 dimensions of sustainability. So what these do in terms from the perspective of organizations, is they create a set of drivers that are pressurizing organizations to operate more sustainably.
Brian, sorry to interrupt. Can you share the screen, because it looks like on our screen is
sorry,
small.
There we go. That should be bigger.
Thank you.
Yeah, we're getting in kind of tiny text here. Okay, so we have regulation issues. We have governments, you know, sort of passing laws to restrict, you know, sort of emissions, pollution, that sort of thing, about, you know, and about employment regulations and things like that. There are economic incentives for sustainability, that organizations can charge more for what are seen to be green goods. They can create a niche for themselves as, you know, as responsible employers, for example. There are ethical pressures. There's a kind of a set of sort of, you know, of moral standards that societies operate by, and organizations which are seen to contravene those can see it having an impact on how they operate. There's monitoring by NGOs who are, you know, organizations such as Greenpeace, for example, look at what is happening, you know, around the world. Sea Shepherd looking at fishing operations. We have customer pressure. Okay, we have customers who are saying, well, look, I'm not going to buy products from you because, you know, I don't think you're an ethical organization that are operating in a sustainable way. We have employee pressures. We have people who are working in organizations who are saying, I don't want to work with you because what you're doing is not ethical. And, you know, we've seen instances of that. There was a story with Google 2 years ago when about 3,000 employees refused to work on an artificial intelligence defense-related project, which forced Google to actually pull out of a contract they had with the US Defense Department. And then we also have the idea of intrinsic motivation, that there is, that, you know, some people are attracted by just the simple sort of values of operating sustainably, and that influences the way in which their organization will operate. So those are the drivers that you know, are pushing on organizations, you know, to pressurize them to operate more sustainably. Now, in order to change the way in which we work, we have to adapt, and adaptation is about learning. So a major challenge for adapting to sustainability is that sustainability is much more complex than just introducing a new computer system or launching a new product. It requires, to some degree, a complete change in mindset and ways of thinking. It challenges the very value framework that the organization and everybody who work in it hold as their core assumptions. And so learning strategies to support sustainability need to work across many different levels. So a whole set of separate but often, you know, interconnected variables need to be recognized and thought about. So this diagram here shows how we can actually see a sustainability focused learning strategy as something of a wicked problem. It's difficult to define the problem exactly. There are many different perspectives on what it means, and there are a number of other wicked problems which will have an impact on our particular wicked problem. So in terms of these, you know, associated wicked problems, we have at the subject level of learning, we have what is sustainability? I've talked about, you know, economic, social, and environmental. None of those are very clearly defined. There are challenges and different perspectives on all of those. So that presents a major challenge for learning. At an organizational level, we have organizational culture and we have its learning culture. So the organizational culture needs to embrace sustainability if it's to contribute to effective learning. The learning culture needs to accept possibly a wider definition of learning than it has at the moment. Often organizations focus very much on the kind of the formal training thing. In terms of shifting values and reorienting people towards working more sustainably, then a more informal approach to learning becomes significant. At the group level, that sort of work group, teams, divisions, that sort of thing, we have the issue of social capital. How well do groups within the organization operate together? How do they share information? How do they relate to each other? Where do they look for information? How do they create it when they find new data? We have the learning transfer climate to consider. How easy is it for new ideas to be absorbed in a situation? And then at the individual level, we have personal attributes, the classic things which are excuse me, which are significant in training, such as cognitive ability, how motivated people are to learn, that sort of thing. But we also have issues about social identity, which is how people see themselves. You know, one of the issues which is often not really considered in training is that people are in an organization and they have values which they bring with them from outside. Particularly with American corporate literature, there's an assumption that everybody buys into the values of the organization, and that what is good for the organization is good for the individual. That's not, you know, that's kind of a sort of a difficult assumption. Certainly in many countries, you know, there's much more of an individualized perspective, that people come with different values. They compromise in order to work in the organization, but they don't necessarily accept those values. And that's informed by faith systems, by belief systems. So, you know, we have people who are committed to, you know, to Christianity, to Judaism, to Islam, to Buddhism, Hinduism, Taoism. And all of these faith systems bring with them a set of values which has an impact on how people see sustainability. So, so we have a real challenge in terms of, you know, what the learning strategy is. Another challenge is that organizations are all very different as far as sustainability is concerned. Excuse me, just having a drink of water. Clearly, every organization will be unique. They'll all have their own attitudes about it. But in order to simplify things, in order to move forward and come up with some ideas, I've looked at the research about organizational sustainability. And what a sort of an emerging consensus is that we can look at perhaps 3 types of organizations. And this draws on the ideas of Chris Argyris and single loop learning, double loop learning, and James March, who talked about exploitation and exploration. And so if we look at those ideas, I suggest we have 3 types of organization we can consider. The level 1 organization is the traditional organization, ones which comply with regulations and do the minimum, observe pollution regulations, follow employment law, and so on. Then we have level 2, transitional organizations, who continue to embrace the business logic of making a profit, but recognize that they can establish a competitive advantage through operating more sustainably. So they sell green products, or they market themselves as environmentally aware, as responsible employers, and so on. But then we have the level 3 transformational organizations, who are questioning assumptions, practicing double loop learning, and they exist in order to promote social environmental sustainability. The idea of profit, their own economic sustainability is secondary, perhaps, is just a simple way of remaining viable. So it's not the major goal. So in this category, we get social enterprises and the like. So based on the characteristics of these 3 different categories of organization, we can start to look at some general requirements for what a sustainability-focused learning strategy might be. And so to do that, I'm going to pull on our old friend, the viable system model. I think that for most of you, you'll know something about the VSM. I won't spend much time going through it, but we can come back to that later if people have specific questions. It's a cybernetic way of looking at how organizations operate. The emphasis is looking at how information flows in a way to regulate variety, so that operational variety is managed at as low a level in the organization as possible. It's a very powerful way of looking at how organizations work, and it has 2, from my perspective, really useful features. It breaks organizations down into 5 systems, so we can map learning requirements against each system. And secondly, it's recursive, so that we can think about how viability works at different levels, such as the organizational level, right down to the individual employee. And then I'll share my screen now, so I'll show you what I'm working on. So, okay, so what we have here now is a table where I have, let me see if I can just get one of these kind of little pointery things here. Okay, so here we have the organization. This is learning content at the organizational level. So I've got S1, S2, S3, S4, S3 star. So what I'm saying is that for a traditional organization, the operational system, the S1, the learning content needs to be that the primary activities comply with all regulatory requirements. So that gives us an indicator as to what learning content is required there. When we move to a transitional organization, we will still have the S1 requirement, the level 1 requirement, but we'll also need to make sure that primary activities produce products and services which contribute to sustainability and improve organizational effectiveness. So that's something to be thought about. Then if we're looking at a level 3 organization, we may well have those, but we will also have that primary activities enhance social and environmental sustainability. We will have to have something about a culture of innovation to strengthen sustainability. So we are now, I just got a message saying my internet connection is unstable. I hope it's working okay. So then we can look at S2, S3. We can look at all of the different levels, different systems, and come up with issues which need to be addressed in a sustainable learning strategy. And we can do this at the team level as well, okay? And then we can also go down and look at the individual level. Okay, so that's the way in which we can use the VSM to generate content, to understand what needs to go into it. Okay, so I can come back now to my slide here. So very powerful. Then, as well as content, we also have to think about other things such as the how we're going to deliver the training, what pedagogical principles we may need to employ. So here I'm bringing in critical systems heuristics, CSH. CSH isn't as well known, partly because it can be difficult to understand the language used, and partly because it's difficult to see how to use it, I think. I struggled with both of these over the years, and it's taken me quite a long time to get to a stage where I think I understand how it works. So basically, it's a tool that helps us to question boundary judgments that are involved in any systems thinking activity. What do we see as important, and what do we dismiss? Who do we talk to or not talk to? Who do we listen to or not listen to? The basic framework of CSH was developed by the Swiss systems thinker Werner Ulrich, and it can be presented as shown in this slide. So we have 12 areas to consider. So there are 3 columns which show who, the what, and the why, and we have 4 rows which are classified by the motivation, the power, the knowledge, and the legitimacy of our system. So again, I don't want to go into too much detail about thinking behind it, but for just an example, just to illustrate what it means, for example, if we're thinking about the measure of improvement, how do we decide that a sustainability-focused learning strategy is important, is successful? Do we get people to fill in a happy sheet at the end of a workshop? Is it about people learning how to develop environmentally sustainable products? Or is it about the impact we see, some measurable change we see in the environment as a result of our new products or services? So these are challenging questions, and CSH forces us to ask them rather than to ignore them. So I will come back to my screen share, and I'll illustrate how this is working in my project here. Okay, so here I've got, so again, let's get my fancy little flashlight. So here we have our boundary judgment questions. Who would benefit from the learning strategy? What is the purpose of the strategy? What is the measure of success? And against each, what I'm doing is I'm building up a table which is for the content of the learning, the mechanisms we're going to use, and the principles we will follow. So, so in terms of for example, the purpose of the learning strategy, what competencies and competencies need to be addressed in the sustainability-focused learning strategy? What are the desired learning outcomes for that? Okay. What is the measure of success? What are the criteria of success for the learning outcomes? And some of these are familiar, but some of them are less familiar. So if I just go down, so for example, in the legitimacy questions, what opportunity does the affected society and natural environment have to challenge the learning strategy? Often in organizations, all we think about is what goes on inside the organization, how we will develop a learning strategy which will maximize our profit, which will improve our product. And we pay less attention to the impact that it has on the outside world. But of course, if we're talking about sustainability, we have to think about the outside world. So this question asks the question, what are the political possibilities for engaging with external representatives in discussing sustainability-focused learning? So do we get people from the outside, from stakeholders, from communities we work within, from Greenpeace, from Sea Shepherd, from Friends of the Earth, from all of these organizations? Do we get them to help us with developing our learning? What content from outside the organization is needed? So you see that CSH forces us to ask questions which we might otherwise overlook. So that's how I've been using VSM. That's how I've been using CSH to develop the strategy. I've kind of gone through most of these things fairly quickly in terms of the tools, but I'm very happy now to spend the remaining 25-30 minutes answering any questions that you might have. Okay, so thank you very much for listening. Over to you.
Okay, thanks, Brian. Really good. We didn't actually have any questions come up into the chat field, so I guess I'll throw it to Mihail, who I know has prepared a few questions.
Please feel free, guys, to maybe come off mute if you've got questions. We won't worry about going into the chat field because it's not a huge group this time around. So, Mihail, if you've got any questions, please feel free to kick us off.
Yeah, I was interested with the levels that you have, Bryan, for the organization.
Yeah.
Does and you specified how the learning goes, how they can be, yeah, the viable system model, for example, how can it be improved? Do you have any steps for moving from one to the next one, or is it just a question of system by system, or you start with moving one system from one to the other in order to move to the next level? For example, if you have traditional organization, how can we make it into a from traditional to perhaps first transitional? So from traditional to transitional,
Yeah, well,
and like using, for example, the viable system model, what do you do first? You know, which system do
yeah.
you look at changing for to move it?
Well, change is about adaptation, and if an organization, you know, is doing the minimum, if it's just complying, but thinks, well, actually, we need to up our game in terms of sustainability, then it's a matter of thinking about what you need to know, what you need to learn in order to get to from level 1 to level 2. So again, you know, then we can look at our so we can go back to this one here. So for example, if an organization thinks, well, okay, we'd like to move from level 1 to level 2. So what do we need to do? So, well, our learning, the kinds of courses and programs that we're running, the kinds of things which people need to be talking about in the workplace need to be more focused on level 2. You know, so what activities can we do? What are our primary activities? What are the products we can produce? What are the services that we can do which can contribute to sustainability, but at the same time, you know, give us a business advantage? So, you know, this table, I think, will help people to think, well, we are at level 1. We are doing the, you know, that we're doing the level 1 type things here. But if we're going to move to a level 2, if we're going to operate more sustainably, these are the kinds of learning related activities that we need to be sort of focusing on. So I think that's how, you know, it would be used in reality. That answer that question?
Okay.
I'm guessing Mihail said that it did.
Yeah.
I think it's probably a really different way to ask the question might be to say if you come across an organization maybe that believes they're transitional and they're actually traditional. That could be an interesting sort of exploration using VSM as well, and maybe lead to different sorts of outcomes for them.
Yeah, well, I mean, VSM has got various modes in which you can use it in. One is the diagnostic mode. If you have an idea as to what are the characteristics in VSM terms of what a transitional and what a transformational organization is, then you look at your own and you think, are we doing this? You know, is this how we're operating? And I suspect for many organizations, it's not going to be, you know, very clearly, you know, one or the other. There may be certain aspects of an organization which are at level 1, some at level 2. So it's the trouble, you know, like in the old saying is, you know, there's lots of models, and all of them are wrong, but some are useful. So trying to divide organizations up into 3 different types, you know, in a reductionist way is a kind of is a bit of a futile exercise. But you know, the value of a model is it helps us to kind of, you know, conceptualize and make some sense of things. So we have to kind of be quite careful about how sort of rigidly we interpret these models. But I think, you know, the VSM provides a very useful way of actually looking at how organizations work internally so that we can do some kind of diagnosis to see what characteristics we can see. Much more so than, you know, the traditional, you know, hierarchical organogram, you know, view of how organizations operate. So even if you have like a chief sustainability officer, you know, that doesn't necessarily mean that the organization is operating particularly sustainably. You know, sometimes, you know, these things can happen for public relations purposes. Sometimes chief sustainability officer just, you know, some of the research which has been done into CSOs and how they operate suggests that that often they stop things getting worse, but they don't necessarily make things any better. So.
That's right. I'll open up to the floor then. Any questions
Yeah.
from the floor, Bryce or John?
I'm interested in the second loop that you referred to in Argyris's double loop learning, because it's all about beliefs and assumptions of people. I'm just curious about, you know, how one can actually help get an attitudinal shift in organisations so they can break out of the level they're kind of stuck at. And I know it's really hard. I'm a coach in a large organisation, and
Yeah,
really the biggest challenge there is always about people's beliefs and so on.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, no, it's very difficult. I mean, I think that's one of the big challenges for sustainability focused learning, is that you know, you've got to get into people's heads as to you know, what sustainability is about and why it's important. And you get some people who are in the organization who are, you know, who got that on board. You know, I think particularly with the younger, more you know, sort of a younger workforce, better educated, you know, who've grown up in a kind of a connected world and who see what is going on around them. They're very aware of you know, what is happening. They've traveled a lot, and so they would have seen, you know, firsthand the issues which are causing us such concern these days. So you may have you may have a workforce which is kind of like that, but you may have an organization which is kind of very stuck in its kind of, you know, we've got to make as much profit as we can, sort of thing. And then, you know, it comes down to, I think, the organizational culture. I mean, I think, you know, senior management will increasingly start to recognize that they can't necessarily continue to operate in the exploitative way that they all have done. They will see that, you know, sort of perhaps newer, more flexible, more far-sighted organizations are starting to adopt more sustainable practice and to change the way in which they're doing things. And so, you know, the organizational culture from as a top-down initiative will start to change. So I think you know, as the kind of the artifacts of culture start to shift, you know, as you know, as so for example, you know, the big issue at the moment is the working from home thing that we've experienced in the last 12, 15 months. Is that for many organizations, the idea of letting people, I remember when I worked at, you know, in the UN, I asked if I could you know, sort of work from home some days a week, because I come into it from being a consultant where I'd always operated as a, you know, from my home office, and they were horrified at the thought of, you know, you had to be in the office. And you know, I mean, I got criticized because I left the office at 6 o'clock in the evening and other people were there until 7 o'clock. The fact that I actually arrived an hour earlier in the morning when the place was empty was neither here nor there. I had to be seen to be in the office. And I think, you know, the working from home issue, which has come as a result of COVID, is you know, it's kind of really interesting, and it's going to change a lot of attitudes about, which are related to social sustainability. So I think, you know, as these things happen, and I think, you know, the COVID-19 pandemic isn't going to be the last problem we face. You know, there's going to be, you know, sort of an ever increasing number of global crises we have to deal with as the next decades go by, then I think there's going to be a reckoning. And I think organizations are going to shift from the top, you know, to recognize the need to be more environmentally and socially sustainable. Yeah. But I think, you know, if you're doing coaching, it's kind of a real challenge. And I think, you know, it's about, you know, finding ways to get people to reflect on their situation, to question their mental models about how organizations operate. It's almost like a sort of subversive activity of getting people to, you know, to really think, well, you know, sort of, what is this all about? You know, so I'm not sure that that's particularly sort of helpful answer, but I think there's a kind of a dynamic in play which is, you know, as time is going to go by. As Victor Hugo said, there's nothing as powerful as an idea whose time has come. And I think, you know, the idea of sustainability is one of those ideas.
Yeah, and I think just playing on what you said there about reflection, it strikes me that some of this is about helping the system to see itself.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think from a coaching perspective, we often talk about holding the mirror up so that the system can see itself and then do that reflection.
That's
to go,
right. Yeah,
we're not outside this, we're actually part of it, and actually,
yeah,
you know, we can contribute productively, or we can actually be creating sort of adverse outcomes.
yeah. And I think that's where, you know, CSH is a really powerful tool, because, you know, I talked about the, you know, the sources of legitimacy, and that's something which organizations often don't do. You know, I did an evaluation, you know, of a training program some years ago, and it was a program for organizations doing coordination of other actors in humanitarian crises. And I said, well, you know, it's all very well evaluating the training program from our internal perspective, but why don't we talk to people who are in these other agencies who are being coordinated and seeing what they think about how well they're being coordinated. And there was a kind of a, you know, deathly silence when I suggested that, because it was, A, it was kind of, wow, really out of the box, but also B, it was, wow, you know, they're, you know, we're going to ask somebody else about how they think about us. You know, that's a really dangerous thing to do. But, you know, they agreed, and, you know, those were some of the most interesting bits of feedback I got in the evaluation, was how other agencies saw this particular agency's representatives. Yeah. So I think, you know, you know, gives us that sort of space where we can, you know, look at things from a different perspective, when we can actually say, have we thought about this? You know, something else that we need to think about here. Do we need to talk to somebody else about this? Can they offer us some guidance as to what is significant and what we need to think about? Yeah, yeah. Thank you.
Cool. I noticed both John and Bryce have come off mute. John or Bryce, do you have a question?
Yes, please. Are wicked problems solvable?
Well, I mean, that's kind of one of the things about wicked problems, isn't it? That actually, there's a big thing in the learning and development world about solutions, learning solutions. You know, I think my job title when I was at UNHCR was a senior learning solutions officer. So it's an idea like, you know, you have 2 + 2 is 4, and 4 is a solution to that. But of course, wicked problems don't work like that. Wicked problems, you know, I don't think you can actually really solve a wicked problem, but I think you can make it better. Okay, so you're kind of constantly looking for, I mean, some of the strategies for sustainability say, actually, you know, you can't really say that you are sustainable, you know, because, you know, you can't define what sustainability is, you know, in a way which everybody will agree with. You know, it's not like the answer to life, the universe, and everything is 42. You know, you can't do that. And so what you have to have is the idea of a vision. You have to have this kind of idea of what, you know, sustainability in your terms looks like, and then try to sort of work towards it in an iterative way. And I think the idea of you know, adaptive management, which is used increasingly in the international development field and agricultural projects, is, you know, we never really know what's going to happen when we do something, when we make a change. You know, every time we change something in a system, we have all kinds of unforeseen, unintended consequences, some good, some not so good. So it's a matter of sort of, you know, of navigating towards the future, looking at what is happening and thinking, well, actually, I tried that and it didn't work. Let's try something else. You know, I think, you know, we have a very kind of, we're often stuck with this kind of linear mindset, is that in order to get from A to Z, we have to go through B, C, D, and E, and all the others. In actual fact, you know, life is more complicated than that, and we have to really sort of think about you know, sort of about approaching things in an adaptive way and be flexible about it. So the answer to your question is no, I think.
Thank you.
Well, over to you, Bryce, I think.
Yeah, sorry, you've introduced a couple of terms which I wasn't familiar with. So could you just sort of expand on the first loop and second loop learning? So apologies if other people sort of know these terms already.
Single loop and double loop learning.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Chris Argyris was you know, he's kind of a big figure in the systems thinking world, and he came up with this distinction. Single loop learning is where we look at something which is happening and we say, well, actually that isn't quite right, and so we make a simple adjustment about what we're doing in order to get it closer to what we're doing, but we don't actually change any of our initial assumptions. So if the organization is, for example, you know, you know, we're doing okay, we're making, you know, decent profit, but we could probably make a bit more profit, then we just fiddle around with the products we're actually doing to make them more effectively, more efficiently, cheaper, so that they cost less to us, so we can make a bigger profit. So you're not actually changing what you're doing. Double loop learning is where you actually say, you know, there's some assumptions we have here about the products we're making, which are completely we should challenge. Are they the right products at all? Should we make a different product? Should we offer a new service to our customer? And so you reflect on the assumptions that you have, change the assumptions, change your value framework, and start doing something different. And that's double loop learning. So it's the kind of the difference between tinkering, adjusting, and actually making strategic changes to things.
Sorry, but is that learning or just analysis you've described? Because
well, it depends what you mean by learning, really. I mean, it's about changing, it's about adaptation. The analysis is the process of going through the, you know, what is going on, if you like. I mean, you know, in systems thinking, there's often a bit of an argument about analysis, which is about, often people talk about it as breaking things down into little bits. But actually, it's if you kind of, it's about thinking and reflecting on the situation, and the degree to which, the depth to which you engage in that sort of thinking and reflection determines whether you're going to be thinking in a single loop way or a double loop way. But I mean, our jurist actually said there's often, you know, no clear distinction between single and double loop. They're more of a spectrum of things. So, you know, there's things which you can do which kind of are not clearly one or the other. Another way of looking at it is this on that. If I just bring that one up a bit bigger. Yeah, the exploitation and exploration. James March, who was a big management theorist, he suggested that actually exploitation was working with what you know. So you take what you know and you fiddle with it, you try and make it better, and that's one strategy. The other strategy is exploration, which is where you go off and you try something new. And you know, there's certain parallels between single loop and exploitation, and double loop and exploration. Does that make things a little clearer?
Yes, it does. So I was actually just reflecting on analysis and what it is, because and I've actually been giving this a bit of thought. So to me, analysis is sorting through the information and then deciding what's relevant, what's not relevant, and then clarifying relationships between the different elements.
Yeah.
And I sort of call it that because a lot of thinking you encounter in people is what I call associative. So something changed, an adverse outcome coincided, therefore the two must be related. And when you analyze things and actually work out, actually, no, this change had nothing to do with that outcome, and there was some other sort of factor involved. So,
yeah. I mean, the word. I mean, I personally am quite happy with the word analysis, but I've had, you know, some systems thinking people bite my head off because they say, well, actually, analysis is a reductionist activity of breaking things down. But actually, with systems thinking, you should be more thinking about sort of synthesis, if you like. But I mean, personally, I think, yeah, analysis, I look at it as a word which just means to me is about sort of, you know, thinking about things and trying to sort of make some sense of it.
Yeah.
You know? So. yeah. But this words are often complicated, and people come into conversations with particular understandings of what a word means, and find it very difficult to see beyond their existing meaning.
Yeah, well, I'm quite sensitive about it because I'm forever being, people are forever saying I'm too analytical, and I kind of stare at them and say, what do you mean by that? I know you don't like it, but what do you actually mean by that?
Yeah, well, I think, it's about, often analysis is about actually getting down into the double loop learning aspect of things, because you're actually trying to think, well, what is going on here?
Yeah.
What are the assumptions which we're making here, which we may not even be aware of, So like the idea of profit. I mean, there's organizations have an assumption, because that's the world we live in, that we have to make a profit. But we don't really need to make big profits. We just need to make enough in order to remain viable.
Well, I think
we have a culture which is about making big profits, to make big money, for everybody to get sort of richer and things like that. And I think that's a questionable assumption. And I think it's an assumption that we as people in the world, are going to have to kind of come to terms with, as to whether we can all continue to get richer in the way that we currently see it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. I think, John, you've come off mute again. Do you have another question? You might make this the last question. I'm happy to stay on the line if Bryan is. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I'm okay.
In the UK, if you guys have got work to do today, I'm not sure.
Thank you very much. It's been great listening to you, Bryan. But as you've been explaining various concepts, and I'm sure we've all got our own kind of mental models of what we've learned from you, right? And if we said to you, write it down, and I'm not asking you to do this, but if you did as a text document, it would perhaps not reflect each of our own mental models. So,
sure.
Using that as an analogy, when you're working with an organisation, you perhaps work with small groups of people, 6, 7 people in a room, and you work through something, and you perhaps reach your own kind of conclusions, mental models, if you like. But then you've got to transition into another room with another 7 people, and you've got an organisation got several thousand people. What's the actual tangible kind of physical output that you use to share so that everybody is kind of on the same page? Does that make sense?
Well, I think when I I'm trying to remember the last time I actually sat in a room with 6 or 7 people, what I did. But I think it's, I think, with something like sustainability, it's about unsettling people, it's about getting people, I think one of the great things about systems thinking is the idea of, multiple perspectives, that we, a lot of people, one of the things which I've been kind of looking at is the idea of, there's a framework called, which goes under different names, but that levels of consciousness. You may have come across spiral dynamics, Beck and Cowan. Ken Wilber is an American sort of thinker, and they have this kind of framework which is about levels of consciousness, that as we go through life, we have a set of values which helps us to deal with the world around us. So, millennia ago, millennia in the past, people's value framework existed to making sure they had enough food and water and, safety and security from being attacked by wild animals. But as we became more sophisticated, our values moved with us to deal with our current world. So, we're, arguably, many people in the world at the moment are in we've got a value framework which is about, sort of material wealth. So from this model, if we go past material wealth, we get to a level where we actually start to recognize our connection with the world around us and our impact on everybody else and the planet, on the environment. So that as you become unsettled by, you know, by how you are in the world around you, you start to question it and you start to look for a new value framework. And so I think, you know, in what I'm trying to do with my sort of research and my writing is to show people how you can get to a point where you feel a bit uncomfortable about where you are at the moment, and that actually, you know, we need to think differently. And I think, you know, I think the COVID-19 pandemic has done that for many people. That we were living in a world where everybody was, most people say, you know, were pretty comfortable with where we were with things, you know, with, you know, certainly people in, you know, wealthy countries like Australia, the UK, you know, Western Europe, United States. We were kind of comfortable with how things were going, but all of a sudden the pandemic has kind of pulled the rug away from under our feet, and we've had to kind of think, well, actually, you know, a lot of our assumptions no longer seem to hold true, that actually, you know, if we shut down international travel, if you can't go to anywhere, what does that mean? How does that, is that a real problem? You know, how can we get around this? What things can we put into our lives to compensate for that? So I think, you know, with helping people to learn about sustainability, it's about kind of that unsettling thing. So I think, you know, sort of in work that I do, when I talk to people about sustainability, I think if I left the room and everybody in that room thinks, whoa, you know, I feel, you know, something has shifted inside me and I need to question how I am in the world around me, I think that would be something. And I think if then you have a culture within an organization whereby people say, you know, I've been thinking about, you know, sort of this, you know, this aspect of, you know, the sort of the way what the organization does in terms of what we produce. Perhaps we ought to do it differently. And, you know, through, you know, sort of thousands of small conversations comes change. I think it's really difficult to get big change, you know, suddenly. I think it has to kind of come, you know, incrementally, you know, just a sort of a groundswell of opinion builds up, and eventually that you get to a tipping point where you can have significant change. So I think that's what I would aim for, is just to unsettle people.
Thank you.
I think there's another. I'm going to steal a question, if that's okay. There's another point, I think, at which maybe it becomes a lot more obvious that change has to happen. So if we're looking at environmental sustainability, social sustainability, but economic sustainability is still sort of ticking along okay, you would sort of think at some point the other two would affect the economic sustainability, and that might be the point at which change has to happen. It may be too late for change to happen in that case. Not really a question, but
yeah.
I was interested to see that those three sort of sustainability sort of things in tension, because if you don't have all three, then it's not sustainable.
Yeah. I mean, I think in terms of economic sustainability, I think the issue is that the economy is something which is what, you know, people sometimes call a social technology. It's something which has been developed in order to help connect between the natural environment and the social environment. So, you know, in traditional societies, there is no real economy. You know, people grow and they exchange products with other people, so they have enough in order to sort of be getting along with. But as societies become more sophisticated and more complex, then we introduce money, you know, because that enables us to be more sort of flexible and be more adaptive to create new things. But the way in which we use that money when we create it is our own choice. So it's something we decide to do. You know, we have a capitalist economy, which kind of has worked very well. It's been very successful at developing, you know, sort of at improving the standard of life for many people around the planet, but it's come with costs. And we don't necessarily need to stick with it. You know, if it doesn't work for us, we can change it. And I think that's an assumption, you know, which, you know, that a lot of people really haven't got their head around, that we've been so used to a a capitalist and in recent years a neoliberal capitalist economy that with there is no alternative, we're told, that actually we can't really see that it is something we have the power to change should we wish to do so.
Probably a good example of double loop learning then, to actually move out of that preconception of having the economics that we run on at the moment.
Yeah. And so, the term I prefer is sustainability economics. And there's a kind of a whole, bunch of, things which are appearing, Kate Rayworth's donut economics, for example. I'm not sure if it's, I guess, you're familiar with that in Australia. Certainly it's done fairly well here. The idea of, she links together the planetary boundaries with these ideas of social sustainability, and her conception of a donut economy is one which lives within this ring where we respect the planetary boundaries, but also we kind of address sort of social issues at the same time. How we get there, I don't know. She doesn't really go into that, but it's kind of a nice idea.
I had an interesting miss here there. I thought you said the stoner economy, not the donor economy.
Yeah.
That's what I thought too.
Yeah. Well, with the stoner economy, you don't really care about it.
That's right. Giles, did you have a question?
Look, mine's just a technical one. Are you going to share the recording afterwards? Because I missed the whole first half hour, and this is a topic really dear to my heart. So I was really disappointed when I realised I'd missed it. So thoroughly enjoyed the end of it. So
it's coming to a YouTube channel near you. So yeah,
awesome.
I'm worried that Giles is trapped in the basement.
I was driving in the car and I just had to stop.
Yeah, I thought we'd suddenly become connected to the dark net.
I thought he was in a Queen video. That's what I. Very good. Well, awesome. Has anybody got one more question maybe to close? If anybody's got one more question. Oh, we're all questioned out. That's good. I get to go have my dinner. That's great. Well, I'd like to thank you, Bryan, and everybody for attending tonight. Like we said at the start, keep an eye out in the meetup space for when we're running courses next. We've got a course coming up on creating conditions for change with Pauline, coming up on July the 19th, I think is the first day. Yep, got it right. Once again, late Sydney time, early UK time, but we'll put the details up into the Systems@Pace space. If you'd like to come off and mute quickly and give Bryan a quick round of applause, that would be lovely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And we'll call it there. Thank you, Bryan.
Yeah, great. Thanks. It's been fun talking to you all. I'm going to now go and look forward to a nice cup of coffee. And the sun, I think, is still shining. So.
Okay. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, all.
Thanks.
Bye.